Hey everyone, welcome back to G-Tech Motorworks. Today we are going to have a look at the Baby Beamer. Introduced in 2004, we're going to have a glance over the first generation and we're going to compare it to its older siblings and see whether it suffers the same problems. So the BMW, there's a number of different engines available for them. We have discussed various engines before in various other videos. So we'll just dive straight in. We're going to talk about oil leaks because the two most common engines in these are of course the 2-litre diesel and the petrol engines. We're going to have a rocker cover leak at some point in its life. It's going to have a sump gasket leak at some point in its life. And if you're really unlucky, you may even find rear main oil seal between the engine and the gearbox. That's going to leak at some point in its life. The diesel engines, now these are particularly susceptible, as we've discussed before, to EGR problems. The EGR cooler itself does have an internal leak. This will obviously cause a knock-on effect with your emission control, your DPF control, and so on. Now, a lot of these, certainly the later ones, they're actually still covered by a long-term ongoing recall or a safety campaign by BMW themselves. So if you've got one and you're worried about it, it's definitely worth having a chat with them before you start heading off to the independent garages or your normal service repair centre. Okay, so by far the most popular engine in these is the 2-litre diesel, and we've discussed this before, and we see a lot of them time and time again, week after week, timing chains. It's something that in theory you should never have to replace, but unfortunately, whether it's a manufacturing defect, whether it's a lack of servicing, unfortunately they just don't seem to make the mark. So if you've got one, you get an engine noise, timing chain noise, get it checked out, get it sorted. It's not the end of the world. It's, to be fair, not too bad a repair. Most garages can sort this out. So definitely something to keep an eye open for. If you've got the petrol, the chain, it's not so much a weak point, but it is something well worth looking into. It's a mechanical part. It spends a lot of its time spinning around. It does wear out. The petrol engines, however, fitted at the front of the vehicle, it's a much easier job to do, far cheaper than its diesel counterpart. But as I say, any kind of rattling noises, get it checked out. Both of them, the petrol and the diesel, we do see quite a lot of oil pump issues. So whether this is again down to lack of maintenance, whether it's had a previous engine problem, what we tend to find is a lot of debris in the sump. No matter how good the service is, no matter how good your oil is, that stuff just doesn't flush out. We don't recommend engine flushes. This just loosens it up, moves it all around the engine, the last thing you want. But there is a safety mechanism on this, and it is the pickup pipe. So the pickup pipe does have a wire gauze on it. Anything that is floating around in that sump gets caught in the little wire gauze. It stops it doing any damage with regards to the top end of the engine, your crank and camshafts, for example. But when it does block up, it brings that dreaded red oil warning light on. Your pressure drops, switch the engine off, pull over to the side of the road, get the vehicle recovered. It's a fairly straightforward repair, but obviously when you're driving along and that light comes on, it's a bit of a panic situation, but it is easily remedied. So we've spoken about the oil leaks, the rocker cover gasket. Another oil leak to watch out for is front crank seal. You've got a vibration damper built into the pulley. These have a really nasty habit of chewing themselves up, snapping. This can damage the seals. It'll also cause lack of charge. You'll lose your power steering. You'll get all sorts of horrible noises. Your water pump's not going to be turning around, causing an overheating situation. So if you find yourself in that position, if you find that vibration damper chewing up, get it done. Get it done straight away. It's a pretty easy repair. It's pretty straightforward, nice and simple. Get that done, save yourself a lot of headache. So the petrol engine, it's pretty reliable. Most people prefer the diesel, mostly because of the miles per gallon. But the petrol engine is a good, reliable engine. It's actually not that bad from an economic point of view, especially if you go for the larger 2 litres. We've spoken about misfires before. I mean, they're common on all vehicles. You've got spark plugs, you've got core packs, these will break down. Your fuel injectors will also break down. You know, it's not just a BMW thing. You find it across most manufacturers. But with BMWs, you do tend to notice them sooner rather than later. It's a very smooth engine, so as soon as you get a misfire, it does kind of stand out like a sore thumb. Eventually that engine management light will pop up, so get it looked at, but make sure wherever you take the vehicle, they do a compression check, because it might be something simple. It might be your spark plug, it might be your core pack, it might be the injector, but there could be another issue. If you've had that misfire for a while, and please guys, don't keep running it with a misfire. You are going to do damage elsewhere. And usually that damage is in the form of damage to the valve, to the piston top, to the inside of the head where the valves seat. You can get pieces knocked out of it, you can get chunks floating around, you can get debris in there, and this will cause all sorts of damage. That goes from a straightforward misfire to a complete engine strip. Best case scenario, head gasket. Worst case scenario, replacement engine. So while we're on the subject of misfires, diesels. So they do misfire. A lot of the time, it's an injector. We see a lot of injectors. However, just recently, I don't know whether it's the age of the car, whether it's quality of the fuel, whether people are skipping on their servicing, but we are seeing quite a few vehicles come through now where we are having a fuel pump collapse situation. So the fuel pump itself, it's a rotary device. It's attached to the chain, goes round and round and round and round and round. Bearings wear out. Now these start to collapse inside the fuel pump. It isn't something you can see, it isn't something you can hear, but eventually your car will just stop. There'll be no warning. And what's actually happening is the debris from that fuel pump swirls around the fuel system, straight up into the fuel rail, down into the fuel pipes, returns back into the tank, pulled up into the lift pump, back up through into the fuel filter, and then round and round it goes. And what it eventually does, it'll either clog up your injector, it'll cause complete failure of the fuel pump, either the high pressure pump bolted to the engine or the lift pump in the tank, or it'll actually short out your injectors. The vehicle will stop, as I say, no warning. Now that is a costly repair because all of those contaminated components will have to be replaced or cleaned out. So fuel pipes can be flushed out, not a problem. Fuel filter replaced, not a problem. But then we're going to have to clean your tank out. That's a bit of a problem. You're going to have your lift pump replaced, not cheap. High pressure fuel pump bolted to the back of the engine via your timing chain, not cheap, and injectors, not cheap. And it isn't something you can skimp on, because if you skip any of those objects, any of those parts, that debris will continue to swirl around and you'll be in the same situation just a few months later. So now we're going to move on to mechanical. Now, here at G-Tech Motorworks, we get a lot of cars come in. As they come into the workshop, we like to do these videos. So most of the cars that you see are vehicles that are in for repair. Now, you all know Joe. Say hello, Joe. This is Joe's car. And sadly, it's in the workshop because it broke. Didn't it, Joe? He's nodding his head. Right, so his clutch went. Now, obviously the clutch is it's a mechanical item, it's going to wear out, it's classed as a serviceable item, so eventually you are going to need a new clutch. Now, these have a self-adjusting clutch mechanism built into the pressure plate, and unfortunately with Joe's, it reached the end of that adjustment. I don't know whether he's racing around, whether he's trying to keep up with IMTY, I don't know what the problem is, but eventually it just went bang on him, side of the road. He had to give us a call. It's all very embarrassing. We had to tow it in. Right, so clutches, keep an eye on them. If you notice the pedals starting to shift position, doesn't feel as though it's in the same place as it was before, the chances are your self-adjusting mechanism is reaching the end of its life and you're going to be left in a situation just like Joe when you're stuck on the side of the road. So before that happens, get it in, get the clutch replaced. Ideally get your flywheel replaced, dual mass flywheels. Most people know about dual mass flywheels, 2-plate operation. They can jam up, they start to get a lot of excessive play, they become noisy, they rattle, it feels like a misfire. You might as well get it done at the same time, save yourself 4.5–5 hours worth of labour. With regards to the rest of the car, now these are pretty reliable. They share a lot of components with the 3 Series, but what they don't share with the 3 Series, completely unique to the 1 Series, and they're scaled down. They're not as complicated as the 3 Series, so therefore a lot less stuff goes wrong. You will get noisy strut top bearings, you'll get the occasional broken spring, leaky shock absorber, disc and pad replacement, you know, the normal routine stuff. We do get the occasional creaking suspension bush on these. Like everything, they do wear out. The suspension is pretty good, as I'm sure most people with a BMW with a 1 Series will tell you. They're a comfortable car for the size. But those bushes, they will wear out. They will need replacing. You'll get a creak every now and again. Prop shaft. The only thing I would talk about with regards to prop shaft, the centre bearing, certainly in the earlier ones, they weren't particularly fantastic. You would get the occasional knocking noise from them, the bearings would wear out, so that's something to bear in mind. The diff, situated in the back, attached to the prop shaft. Again, some of the earlier ones, we used to have issues with bearings wearing out. I can remember a few years ago, we seemed to have a diff in every other week for a rebuild. Not so much now, certainly not so much with the newer versions. One thing which is definitely worth mentioning, I can't remember whether we spoke about it before in one of our videos, but ABS. So it's a pretty reliable system. We don't see that many problems, the occasional broken sensor, worn out wire, that sort of thing. But we do get a lot of complaints where people are driving the car, they'll get to a certain speed and all of a sudden the car will start vibrating, or they'll get a traction control light flashing on. It doesn't feel quite right. We do a fault code read, there are no faults in any of the systems. That's because the fault in question, the car doesn't see it as a fault, it thinks it's doing its job right. What it's actually doing is on the rear drive shafts, we have 2 reluctor rings. There are a series of holes on a ring. As they go round, it's picked up by a reluctance sensor, but what happens is they'll get a crack in it and it will start to open up and it adjusts the size of the ring. It doesn't compare with the one on the other side or the ones on the front, so the vehicle thinks that we're in a situation where one wheel is turning at a slightly different speed to the rest of them, and therefore it operates the traction control to bring it back up to the same speed. Once that speed is back and that sensor ring closes back up, everything's fine, you accelerate, it opens up again and you're back into the same situation. We can repair these. If you were to take the car to the dealer, they'll just tell you that you need 2 new drive shafts, 2 new sensors. You can get the rings separately, and it is a repair that we can do at GTEC Motorworks. But beware, if it has gone very, very rusty, which a lot of these do, especially the older ones, sometimes they're beyond repair and we do have to put the new drive shaft in it. So now we move on to electrical faults. And again, just like the 3 Series, it's not as complicated. Earlier ones, they didn't cram them with as much technology as, well, the newer ones obviously cram with plenty of technology, but the older ones, not so much. So as a result, you don't really get a great deal wrong with them electrically. One of the things you do see a lot of, people change the headlights. It's a BMW, people like to modify them. There's all sorts of manufacturers on the market who produce headlights, brighter ones, better ones, halogen ones, LED ones, all sorts. But the biggest problem we see is a lot of them come from China. They're not particularly brilliant. You get what you pay for. So they'll come in, we've got warning lights on the dash, the lights don't work properly. You take the headlight out, you throw it in the bin and you put something decent in it. Same with the rear lights. People tend not to mess around with those so much because rear lights are rear lights. Front lights, you want them brighter, you want to see where you're going. Rear lights, people don't care. So if you are going to update the car, if you've bought one recently, if it's got those terrible aftermarket parts on, get rid of them, put something decent on. I'm not saying don't upgrade it, but if you're going to upgrade it, spend the money, make sure it's worth the money. With regards to the rest of it, so rear wipers, if you've got the version with a rear wiper, so the hatchback, occasionally, not all of them, but occasionally, we do see a lot of water ingress into the rear wiper. Now, a lot of manufacturers run the rear washer jet through the centre of the motor, which isn't the best idea. It looks fantastic, it's nice and compact, but when there's a problem, that water leaks out into the motor stops working, so you've got no rear wash wipe. Very frustrating. The only other thing really worth mentioning on these is the rear screen. Now the rear screen, obviously mounted at the rear, a lot of these, they actually house the DAB aerial. Sometimes, not so much this one because it's got the traditional aerial, but on some of them they've actually got the shark fin for the GPS, and then they put your radio antenna in the rear screen. So they'll use the filaments that run through the screen that normally look like your heated elements. They'll attach a couple of booster boxes, and that becomes the supply for your DAB radio, your standard radio, your traffic announcements and such like. These have a nasty habit of either getting scratched if it's the filament in the screen, especially if you've got a little dog running around in the boot, or the little module boxes will fail. Or we've actually seen the wires that come through from the tailgate into the main body sort of fracture, especially with age and heat and so on. So that's something to watch out for. If you're buying one, jump in it, make sure the radio works, make sure the DAB works, make sure the traffic announcement works. But other than that, they are a pretty reliable car. They're certainly worth the money. There's a lot of them around, there's a lot of choice, there's a lot of models, there's a lot of variations. And as I say, when people start modifying them, there's a lot of stuff to look out for. But on the whole, they are a cracking car. They're just as comfortable as a 3 Series. They're certainly as reliable as a 3 Series, and despite all the horrible things we've just spoken about, as we've said before, you're not going to get all of those at the same time on every single car. Right, so everyone, thank you for joining us again for this Common Problems video. Thanks for Joe. Obviously he's not too happy about the car breaking down, but we're always happy to use his car for one of our videos. So don't forget, we'll see you again soon with one of these. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe and share buttons, and we will see you again for the next one.